everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How are you doing, folks? I returned to you after a week off because I got married and went off without a hitch. Who knew 7 months of intense planning would actually pay off? Who knew the weather would cooperate, considering it was supposed to rain, and we wanted a outside COVID-safe wedding? Who knew we would go through it? And I guess so far we have not gotten COVID, so looks like all the precautions we took have paid off. And I'm very happy and also very tired. So I will dispense with this intro, because I do real long intros anyway. But I'll cut to the chase because I really like this episode today. This is Kate Fagan. And if you don't know who that is, why don't I read you her bio right now? Growing up in Wisconsin and then outside D.C., musician Kate Fagan made many more stops before ending up in Chicago in the late 70s and early 80s. There she became the founder and frontwoman of long-running Chicago's second-wave ska trailblazers, Heavy Manners, and on her own, she recorded and self-released the new wave single, I Don't Want to Be Too Cool, which became the best-selling single ever by a local artist at the legendary Wax Trax Records. 35 years later, Captured Tracks has released an expanded, remastered edition of I Don't Want to Be Too Cool as a full-length album, and it's great. A lost classic that I really, really enjoy, and Kate has a very interesting history, and we talk all about it today. I think it started off a little frosty, as these sometimes do, but as Kate realized this wasn't just a usual boring interview, she warmed up and we talked about some really interesting things about her relationship with her parents and how they moved around a lot and the Vietnam War era world that she found herself in and what that meant to her, and I don't know, like a ton of things, from the town she eventually lived in that had a lot of draft dodgers living there secretly, to her father's secret life, a lot of other things. So I hope you enjoyed this. Kate was really cool to talk to, and I like her album a ton, so you should get it. And by the way, if you are a new listener to Beginnings, thank you for checking out the show. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Leave a review. Why not? I've been doing this show for over 13 years, and I basically have not asked people for reviews up until recently. So I think it helps whatever Apple's algorithm is. It helps people find the show. So if you have 30 seconds on Apple Podcasts, please do that. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman, although Twitter is not much fun anymore. But I guess I'm still trying to write jokes over there. And of course, my free philosophy Substack, The Slow Dystopia. I have a new essay coming soon about why everything feels so weird these days. You can find that at theslowdystopia.substack.com. Coming up on the show, Oren Ambarchi, wonderful Australian experimental guitarist. So stay tuned for that. But for now, let's talk to Kate. I know a little bit about you. Grew up outside of Washington, D.C., right?
No, I grew up in Wisconsin. And I moved to Washington, D.C. when I was in high school.
Okay. All right. What was growing up in Wisconsin like?
I grew up near the Milwaukee River, which was very beautiful, with willow trees and, lots of fun along the river, looking for treasures, swimming, water skiing. During the winter, we'd take a snowmobile and even ski behind it, or sled behind it. So I was brought up in a suburb of Milwaukee, actually. I was born in Madison. And my dad was a lawyer, and my mother was a therapeutic dietitian. So they have passed, but we had a nice situation going. As a kid, I was always organizing things. I started the Frog Club, which we even had a newsletter, so when I was a little kid. And then I started the Flying Birdman Club. That was a daredevil club where we had to walk across, the roofs of houses, and we had we built a fort up in the rafters of the garage. And it was this sort of daredevil club that we started. We were jumping off of garages and just, I don't know, it was boys and girls playing together. So it was kind of a rough house kind of neighborhood group. That was fun. And then I started doing little events like little animal contests and little animal shows in the garage, and sort of starting to organize little event kind of things. When I was a kid, I had Beatlemania, and I was enterprising. I got little jars and I made terrariums and I sold them to have enough money to go see the Beatles. And then I took piano lessons. I was a Girl Scout. I was in the church choir. And then around 12 years old with Beatlemania, I started going to live concerts. For example, the Power of Fear and the Raiders, and that kind of time. And of course, people opening up for Power of Fear and the Raiders were old Motown people that were sort of aging out. So you'd see James Brown opening up for the Monkees, and that kind of thing. So that was, my youth in Wisconsin. And then my father started moving around a lot, and we went to Maryland.
Wait, can we talk about outside Milwaukee for a bit? And also the Monkees. You saw the Monkees live?
Oh yeah. Monkees, Dave Clark 5, the Young Rascals, a lot of those kind of British invasion groups. Yeah. I think I saw Dave Clark 5 a couple times. I had a crush on the Dave Clark 5.
The Monkees are foundational for me. Yeah. I know we're two different generations, but when I was a kid, they were on repeats on MTV. They showed them in the 80s. Uh-huh. And so that became that somehow wove itself into my creative DNA at a young age. I'm like, oh my God, you got to actually see them in their prime live.
Oh yeah. All their cuteness and wackiness and playing their instruments.
Yeah.
Remember, there was always the rumor that they couldn't play instruments, but they actually did play their instruments.
Yeah.
It was fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Headquarters is the first album where they all played together and wrote songs together, as opposed to it being, written by Carole King and other people. Right.
Peter Noon still has that show on Sirius Radio where he pretends he has the voice of his mother all the time, giving him advice as a young rock star. But the Monkees, they were really involved in they knew all the other people in the London scene too. So they have a lot of stories about when they were with the Stones or when they were with the Beatles and all that, which, they really have more cred, I guess, than I thought they did at the time, because they really did that after school show for the longest time. Yeah.
But it was the Beatles that really did it for you.
Yeah, we had Beatlemania. I have two sisters, and next door were girls, a family with, I think, 4 girls. And we'd roller skate in their basement to the Beatles singles. We'd buy singles of the Beatles as they came out, and we'd roller skate around in the basement to their songs. We just all loved the Beatles. We got hit hard with Beatlemania as tweeners. Yeah.
Do you remember what it was that it sparked in you?
I think there was a real joy that it sparked in me. A real music became a real happy place for me and a creative place. But even that I was roller skating in the basement to Beatles songs was this feeling of, you know, joy and excitement and movement and almost flying because you're on skates. And so I think that it was really visceral for me, the Beatles and their music. And also they have a lot of joy. They're about a lot of love songs. And I just caught on with that. That was really big for us in our neighborhood. And we'd have neighborhood parties and play Beatle music, play Freddie and the Dreamers and do the Freddie.
Wait, what's that?
This band, Freddie and the Dreamers. I'm telling you now. Do you know that? Anyway, so he had a dance called the Freddie, and I think I have pictures of my father doing the Freddie. So we were really involved in that British invasion in that era when we were kids. I remember doing puzzles in the living room, jigsaw puzzles, and listening to the Supremes over and over again, too. It was a great era for Motown as well. So those were two big influences for me as a kid.
Maybe I am putting this together, but it sounds like you had a somewhat tight-knit family.
Well, for a while, I would say there was an era that we were a tight-knit family. I think very much my father would go to work and he'd tell us he was going to the workshop. So I assumed he was working for Santa Claus. And my mom stayed at home for quite a while. And then I think my little sister was 8. She went back to work. And she was a dietitian, so she worked in the hospital setting. But we all went to church together, and our neighborhood was very tight. All the kids and parents were very tight. I think we all belonged to the same church and went to the same school, and my mom was in PTA with the neighbor next door and that kind of thing. So I think we were very close in that way. And then when we moved to Maryland, when I was in high school, I was really shocked. I was really sad. I was really traumatized to have to move at the end of my sophomore year and leave all my friends and move somewhere different. And my parents moved, and their marriage started breaking apart when we moved to Maryland. So it was going from a time of, like you say, kind of close-knit and safety, and you knew everybody in your neighborhood, to moving somewhere and really being all of a sudden the new people in town, the outsiders, not East Coast people, Midwestern people. So that sort of outsider thing happened to me suddenly. And of course, when you change schools, your classes, if you change, well, for me, it was in the middle of the year every time I changed school. So you're either learning, you've already learned whatever it is in one class, and then in another class, you haven't gotten the basics at all, and you're in the second semester of math or something like that. So it was hard to navigate, but I mean, I always did well academically, but it was just on a lot of levels, a big change for me. And of course, it's the Vietnam era and living outside of Washington, D.C., and it being a very political time. All of a sudden, with a real youth quake going on around the nation, and people, weren't drinking beer in the backyard in Wisconsin anymore. They were smoking pot, and it led me to. I was always on the school paper in Wisconsin as well, but I found my bearings. I think I was in advanced English, and I was on the school paper, and I found sort of birds of the feather. And in fact, I just went back for a high school reunion in Maryland. So we're a group that really stuck together for a long time. And it was that hippie era, really, in the music of that era. After school, we'd, maybe smoke pot and listen to whether it's the Sweet Baby James album or Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young or Joni Mitchell, all those kind of poetic writers, were interesting to get together and listen to with friends and to start going to those shows.
So it seems like the move to Maryland was disruptive on many levels.
Yes, it was.
And if you don't mind, I'm kind of curious about some of these things. But first, let me just ask, why did you move? Why did your family move to Maryland?
My dad was offered the job as the first director of the EEOC. And he in Wisconsin, he was the director of the Chamber of Commerce and National Chamber of Commerce. And he was a union lawyer, a labor lawyer. And he ended up moving as a career move to Washington, which was once you live in that area too. I think for my father, he really got bit with the bug of politics and living inside the Beltway because he returned there over and over again in different roles to work for the government or government entities. He was a lobbyist later on for Lockheed. You really get the bug. And when he remarried, he married the director of the Small Business Administration, he was and she's African American. So I was then in a kind of a blended family that was really interesting and intriguing for me. She was a wonderful woman, and I'm still friends with at least her son, and I are good friends.
Was there any friction because you seem pretty left leaning?
Yeah. Oh, very much so.
At least, the songs you've written and your lyrics and your dad being eventually, I mean, it seems like your dad was doing like labor law, right? But then being a lobbyist for Lockheed, it seems like there is a little movement there, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, he was very much involved in the civil rights movement and he wrote open housing legislation, in fact. And he was in my household in Wisconsin too. We were very much involved in going to the inner city churches. And, my dad would help with, those sort of uplifting programs that were in Milwaukee. And we'd volunteer as kids. And, so he was very much a part of the civil rights movement. And later on, I just think the tide had turned so much with being a lobbyist for Lockheed in his later years and all that was just, I think, simply finding a good paying job in Washington.
Yeah. It is interesting, though, to trace that is very much as you get into Reagan's America, right?
Right.
Right. Which you are in your music at the time rebelling against.
Right. Well, my father was in the Nixon administration. And then we moved to Connecticut because he refused to work for Nixon anymore. In fact, my father tells it that for the EEOC, which was, of course, bringing up lawsuits, and it still does, against, all different kinds of, company problems with companies, hiring practices and all that. And so in Wisconsin, wait a minute, where was I? I'm sorry. Are you going to edit this?
Yes.
Where am I?
Reagan's America. And your dad working for Nixon, but then moved to Connecticut.
Oh, yeah. Nixon wanted him to not bring lawsuits against certain donors, as my father tells it. And so it was difficult for him because I think he really wanted to call him out, but he knew he wouldn't have a career or work for anybody ever again. So instead, he took a job as the director of the Mechanical Contractors Union in Connecticut. So then in the middle of my senior year, I moved again. I know. Ouch. Yeah. That was tough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. So I want to go back to the first move to Maryland because do you know if your parents, and you may or may not know this, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you know if your parents, if the move was like the final straw that kind of disrupted their marriage, or do you think that the move was like the start of them falling apart as a couple?
I think they started falling apart as a couple earlier, and it was sort of to save their marriage that they were going to do sort of a new start somewhere else. Because I believe my father had girlfriends in Wisconsin. Because we lived in Milwaukee and he worked for the Chamber of Commerce that was in Madison. So he'd spend a few days in Madison every week as well. And we always thought that he had somebody special there. And so did my mother. And I think the move was maybe to get a new start and to move away from that situation as well as it being a very exciting thing for my father to do. And it was also a new position in government. So I think, it was the whole package together. But my mom had started going through menopause and had like a miscarriage when we got to Maryland and, was going through that kind of trauma. And then she had rebellious teenage daughters. And that was difficult for her. I mean, I ran away from, I'd hitch. At that time, you could hitchhike all over the place. So there were times when I hitchhiked to music concerts in New Jersey.
From Madison, Maryland. From Milwaukee. Oh, from Maryland. Okay.
From Maryland.
I was like, what?
From Rockville, Maryland. I know that's a long one. But, and my mom was really fit to be tied because of, I was at that point just being just acting very independently and really pursuing my own individuality. And I was also very angry at them.
Yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you know, like, you said you back in outside Milwaukee, in Wisconsin. Sorry, I was like, that's Wisconsin, right? In my head. My knowledge of geography is so poor. But you said that you kind of knew about your father's affairs. Did you start rebelling then? Because that seems to me that would be a thing that might make me want to rebel at that point, besides just being a teenager.
I became aware of it afterwards. I mean, my mom knew about it and I knew that there were things that were upsetting her. And I felt like my father had two lives going on. He was, in the suburbs of Milwaukee 4 days a week. And then he was in Madison, like Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday or something like that. So I had this distinct feeling that my father had a couple of, he had two lives going on. But I didn't really put that together with that he might have had a longtime girlfriend in Madison, Wisconsin at that time. But I knew something was awry in that he seemed to have divided attentions. And it seemed more and more difficult in a way for him to come back into the Milwaukee world, to re-enter that world every week. It seemed he was becoming more distant. And, I was getting older too, and I was going in my teenage years and starting to drive. And my parents, as long as I got B's or better, I could drive the car as much as I wanted. So I was, always out and about. And so I didn't notice, I don't think, as much because I was busy being a very busy teenager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, No, I get that. That.
Well, when we moved to Maryland, though, I became aware that he had an apartment in the city. And I think that is kind of typical with Washington people. They, the senators and congressmen and aides and all that, they come in from out of town and they all have these apartments and all that going on. But I remember becoming aware of that when my mom was sort of confronting my father with it. That it was somewhat secretive. And that's when I really started putting it all together that my father was really a philanderer. Really, he always was, as I found out later.
Yeah, that's really rough for both you and your mom to kind of have to confront.
And I felt that when my parents, eventually, my dad just left it. When we moved to Connecticut, he wrote a note and left. He disappeared. Right. He packed his car and he disappeared. My mom came in. It was breakfast. I was sitting at, the breakfast table. My mom comes in and says, he's gone. And I go, who's gone? She said, your father's gone. I go, well, where's he gone? He's gone for good. For good. I mean, I didn't have any idea of that he was that unhappy or that pulled by another direction or another life, that he would actually leave. And it made me, we had to finally, years later, get hire a detective to find him. Right. He disappeared. And we found out later that he moved to Virginia Beach and just kind of dropped out. Right.
Do you know what was going on with him? Because
I was so confused. I was convinced he was involved. He was Highlight and racetracks and all this stuff were coming into Connecticut, and he was with the Mechanical Contractors Association. And I knew that there was involvement between those things. So I was just wondering, and the mafia involvement, huge in those kinds of projects. And for myself, I was always wondering if my father, got out of favor with the organization in some way, or financially or something, and kind of disappeared. But by the time I ran into my father, so I'm living in Chicago. Years later, I get this phone call. Hi, it's your dad. Can you go to the Bulls game tonight? And boy, do you have some explaining to do. And by then, he had a stroke.
Oh.
And he was affected by it. And he was such a different man to really, I would ask him what happened. And he was always very funny and very charming, my father, and smart and articulate and kind of a good time kind of guy. But he never really delved into what those missing years were all about. And it was so interesting to my mom and my dad when they reached like 80 years old. I thought they were so compatible, but of course they never saw each other for years, but they both had taken up photography. They had both traveled to some of the same places. They both seemed to be interested in the same kinds of things. And I thought I felt like it was really a shame that they didn't stick it out sort of during a hard thing, because in their later years, they were, I thought they would have really enjoyed each other's company. And of course, I was the only one that would talk to my father. My two sisters will never talk to him.
What was different about your relationship with him where you felt you could, well, I don't know about forgive, you can tell me, but like where at least you could come to some kind of peace with his decisions?
I think first of all, I think I'm more like him, and that I was his favorite. There's no doubt about it. And I ended up getting a degree in journalism. I was a Washington leadership scholar. And my father lived in Washington, in Georgetown. And I sort of thought that this is an opportunity for me to strike up a relationship with him again. And so I got close, and I really adored his wife, Helen. And they were a really, my father and I were very forgiving to each other, I think. This sort of, I was willing to just sort of, let's restart, let's reboot our relationship, and let's enjoy the things we enjoy about each other. So, it was sort of a new start for us. But I was, like 40. Or 30, in my 30s, I think, when I got a new start with my father. So he was quite old, but I really enjoyed his company, and he was involved in he was so involved in politics. He read the Congressional Reader every day. He read 5 newspapers every day. He and Helen were really smart. They gave me really good advice with my career and my life and what I was doing at that time. My father was really proud of me, getting a degree, and then I got a master's degree. He'd call me up and say, "You're my Tiger Woods." Yeah. So I found kind of the love I was missing at that time of my life. My father was really he became a really you go girl person for me. And he came to see me play in Chicago, actually. He came in and he saw me at Chicago Fest.
Huh.
So, yeah, he was very much. But I think I still had a wall up. And, I wanted to be close with him, but not so close to him that we were real deep confidants.
Uh-huh. Do you have that wall up in general, or was this just in this particular paternal relationship that you had that wall?
I think, I didn't have the same wall with my mother for sure, but my father, I felt like I didn't want to get hurt, I think.
Yeah.
As part of it. And also my two sisters were just enraged that I'd even talk to my father, much less see him, much less spend Thanksgiving in Washington, D.C. with him and his extended family. So it really, and my father would talk to me and he'd say, "What do I have to do to get your sisters to talk to me?" So I felt I told him I do not want to be in the middle of that, but he couldn't help returning to it because he was so sad that he totally alienated his other two daughters. But they were so angry at him. They've never been able to forgive him for just leaving.
Yeah.
And of course, he didn't pay alimony. My younger sister was still at home. I had to drop out of college because he didn't pay my tuition. That kind of, and my mom losing her house and him not giving her. Yeah. So he put our family into a very tenuous situation financially and emotionally, and never really explained well to my mother why he left. It was very damaging the way he did it, to just leave a note and split for 12 years or so.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's very difficult on all sides. Like, just if I can maybe see your dad through your own empathy, but he's of a time where men are supposed to keep everything kind of inside. And I know, like, when you repress stuff, it really messes with your head, and your behavior comes out in odd ways. That's not to excuse his behavior, but to give it some kind of context. I mean, you can tell me if I'm accurate in any way.
No, I think you're accurate. Mm-hmm. I think so. And he wasn't a man that was used to talking about his inner life, his feelings. He was very good at talking about what he thought about something. And he was interesting to talk to. And of course, World War II veteran in the Navy. And he played football for the University of Wisconsin and, became a lawyer in Wisconsin. And, he had an interesting life, but he didn't talk about it much. In fact, we have the World War II Museum, of course, in New Orleans. And, that you can find your relatives. And I bought a brick for him there, but in memory of him. But I never talked to him about what he did in the war. They never wanted to talk about that. I mean, I knew he was in the Navy, but when I went back into the World War II Museum, I was trying to figure out what battles he might have been in. Was he I think he might have been in Midway.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I was I knew he was in the Pacific, but I didn't really know a lot about it. And I wish I'd asked him more about that and other things from that era. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, forget the mores of the time about masculinity and what it is to be a man and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The PTSD alone is probably enough to really create a lot of havoc in people's lives.
I think so. I think so. I never remember the men talking about that in the kitchen or anywhere else. Like, what did you do in the war? I never heard my dad discussing that with his friends. Whenever I asked my dad about the war, he'd say war is hell. And that's all he'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad says the same thing about my grandfather. My grandfather fought on the European theater on like Normandy. And he says never talked about it. And if his war buddies were over, they were just talking about like good times when they were on leave, and they never talked about the actual war part itself.
No. Mm-mm. I think it was horrifying.
Yeah, it had to have been. Yeah. Horrifying, and no one went to therapy then. So.
No one did. Oh my God. If his generation had gone to therapy, that would have been great. But my father loved music. He loved Sinatra. I mean, there was always big band music. My parents loved, of course. And my parents sometimes went to Vegas to see, the Rat Pack. So they were that kind of generation too. Very much cocktail parties and that kind of thing when I was growing up. Every weekend it seemed that there was a cocktail party that they were going to.
So the move to Maryland, do you think that disrupted a path in your life?
Yes.
Like, what was the path you were on before the move?
I would have probably, I think that I would have been on a different path for college for sure. Because by the time I moved in my senior year again, I was very confused about where I wanted to go or if I wanted to go. And I think with both my parents graduates from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, that I think I would have more gone into that path. I think I would have had a stronger identity. My family on both sides go way back in Wisconsin. So I think I would have been more connected to my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, and had more of a framework around me with that. When we moved away, we were very, not outcast, but we were far away from my mother's and father's roots, the cabins we go to in the summer, the Packer games that we'd always go to and have tickets for since my grandfather, and that kind of thing. So I think I really moved away from having family traditions that were larger, and I think I was very confused about what path I wanted to go in terms of higher education and what I wanted to study and where I wanted to go, and I think that played out very differently. Moving to Maryland and then moving to Connecticut, I felt very disenfranchised from my Wisconsin family.
Before the move, did you have an ambition of something? Did you have, or even just like a vague kind of, might be fun to do when I'm an adult?
No, I was always interested in journalism. I was always interested in being a writer. And my father and mother both encouraged us. Both my sisters are writers, in fact. And and I had a grandfather that was a writer, very much published. And it was in my family, and I found it very early, and journaling and writing. And I think that I would have pursued journalism for sure. That's the path I was on. And later on at IU, many years later, I got a degree in journalism, finally.
Do you remember the first time that writing piqued your interest in a way that more than just, it's like, oh, all right, I'm doing this, and it was like something that kind of like grabbed you?
Yes. I think when I moved from Wisconsin to Maryland, I wrote a lot of letters because at that time, you weren't calling people long distance on the phone.
Right.
I wrote a lot of letters. I wrote a lot of journaling. I wrote a lot about my feelings and, different situations. So I think I was much more alone after I moved. So I kind of kept myself company by doing a lot of writing. And it became a different relationship for me than, having to write a newspaper article or writing a paper or an essay or short story for school. All of a sudden, I was writing out of kind of a need to express myself and to get my inner life out.
Did you have any other way to express it? Or was it just writing? Like, this is the thing this is helping me get out whatever is inside.
You mean like sports or something? Or?
Yeah, anything. I don't know. Drinking, like hanging out, like new friends that you made. I don't know. I'm just trying to
Oh yeah, I really got into like, I was in the advanced English class, and those are still a lot of my friends. And I was also in ski club, and I was a good skier I was from Wisconsin, and I skied in Wisconsin. So I came out there, and I still have, I still have reunions in Colorado with my ski friends from high school. And, we were on the school paper together. So I did have friendships, but I didn't have a lot. I didn't know a big gang of people. I had friends that were part of a big gang, and maybe I'd go to a party and I'd know a few people, but I wasn't connected to a big gang of people that had gone to school together since kindergarten or whenever. But in Maryland, everybody's father worked for the government in one way or another, or, an institute or something like that. So there were a lot of liberals out there, and a lot of liberal families, and a lot of really liberal kids. So we were there during, the Vietnam era, and when they instituted the draft. And so we were very involved in that kind of going down to Washington, writing about it, talking about it together, debating about different things. The every day, like another horror being in the paper about what was going on in Vietnam, and people in my age group suddenly becoming an age that they could be drafted. And so that kind of thing was really a glue at that time. And of course, yes, marijuana for sure, and LSD, a lot of us did LSD at that time. I can't say that I did a lot of it, but I did. But when everybody else was doing it, I was doing it too.
Do you think it helped you? Did it open you up at all?
I think it's kind of a yin and yang with that. I think that it was very creative, that kind of eye-opening thing. But I also think, I don't know if it ever helped me figure myself out in a way that would create me to move forward in a certain direction. I think it made me appreciate more about art and music and nature and conversation, but I don't know if it ever helped give me a direction.
Were you self-aware of writing being an outlet for you at the time, or was it just a gut instinct, like, oh, I feel better after I write?
Well, I think it in some ways both, but I had a feeling that writing was something that I was good at, and that, years later, a girlfriend of mine sent me all the letters I wrote her. I still have them in my attic. And I thought, wow, I was so smart when I was 15, 16, 17. I was so insightful at that time. So I think it really helped me figure out the world and where I fit in it and what I thought about. I think authenticity is something that is really important to me in art, and why, what I Don't Want to Be Too Cool, my song is really about is, finding your authenticity. And I think my writing really helped me find an authentic voice, and to be good at tapping into it, to listening, to actually listening to it. I think a lot of people have like maybe a poetic inner voice, or sort of a, they ponder things, and start to put ideas together, but they don't necessarily put it on paper or believe that that's kind of an important thing for them. It doesn't become as important to them maybe. Where it was really important to me to be able to really articulate a feeling authentically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that people are, look, I think when I write characters or something like that, I imagine people's properties, people's characteristics are faders on a mixing board. And so you can always move them up and down depending on, so, everyone's
That's cool.
Faders are in a certain position, in a normal context, and then you change the context and okay, now they're more angry.
Right.
You move that up or whatever.
Yeah.
That's just the way
the situational. Yeah.
Yeah. That's just the way I try to visualize it. And I think a lot of people are, I don't know. I don't have any, I can't go in anyone else's heads, but it feels like based on people's behaviors that they just are taught to either naturally they don't look inwards, they're not self-aware of stuff, or they're taught not to, or they deny what's going on. And that's what makes me curious about, what made it possible for you. And I'm wondering if it was this move that kind of disrupted things. And also, yeah, that gave you the chance to look inwards.
Yeah. And yeah, right. I think you're right. I think it was a disruptor that really was formative for me. Really created, I think, that the artist in me, what awoke the artist in me through sort of that trauma and trying to express that. And, just the odd things around that time. I had a boyfriend in Wisconsin. I wasn't interested in getting married or anything like that, but, he showed up at my high school graduation with a ring, asked me to marry him. And in his family, I think people got married out of high school. And just a lot of things were broken off and started again from that move. That move it came back in different ways. That was one of the ways, sort of my past haunted me or caught up with me, or that things got really disconnected for a lot of people. And other people, and how my life and my disconnection affected other people as well.
Sorry, walk me through your old boyfriend showing up. This is Connecticut where you're graduating?
Yeah.
Walk me through him showing up with a ring, please.
Oh, it was more like, what are you doing here? And I'm here to ask you to marry me. And me just really feeling like, wow. That's out of the blue, and just, I'm not ready to do that. And this is really out of the blue for me. Well, I've never forgotten you, and, the love of my life and all those kinds of things. It was really intense, but I wasn't as moved by it as maybe you'd think I'd be, because that was really, by then, he was really in my past. So it seemed very kind of out of the blue and even kind of tangential, that suddenly this person would show up, and I didn't really realize all the way along that he continued to have these feelings, or was even maybe possibly planning for a long time to come back into my life at a time where I could maybe be his. So that it surprised me, and I really didn't spend a lot of time with him after saying, this isn't happening, and he was kind of crushed and disappeared. I didn't, we didn't have makeup sex or something, we didn't do that. We didn't go out for a drink and he'd go oh, okay then. We just pretty much he just sort of disappeared back out into the crowd,
Yeah. No, by the way, I assumed that you've been transformed. All right. You've moved once already. Your parents have their marriage is kind of dissolved. You've moved to Connecticut. You've gone through going to protests and things like that, you've been transformed while this guy has still been just living in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Yeah. This makes so much sense. I'm like, yeah, sure, of course. Like the fact that you were nice about it and not like, are you nuts? That's the part where I'm just like, oh, you were very, you're a very empathetic person.
I tried to be, yeah. Well, I am. I am an empathetic person, but this whole era in Connecticut was a whole different trip because I'd say in Maryland I was with sort of upper middle class kids. Basically, everybody's dad or mom or whoever had a pretty good job with the government in some way, or a think tank, or When I moved to Connecticut, we lived in a small town that was very blue collar, factory and that kind of thing. And that was a whole different situation and high school for me to move into in the middle of my senior year. And I already it was not that good of a high school. The Connecticut high school wasn't like Richard Montgomery High School in Maryland, which is in the top 20 high schools still. My high school at Guilford High was not, a lot of people didn't go on to college where, for example, in Rockville, 95%. It wasn't the same in Guilford, Connecticut. And so it was a different situation. And there's always been something I wanted to write, maybe a play about, that there were a lot of draft dodgers living in basements in town. And I had a couple of girlfriends and girls in my neighborhood that they were their boyfriends and they couldn't come out because a couple of them were AWOL. A couple of them were just plain dodging the draft. And for some reason in Connecticut, we had this situation going on that I was aware of. And I knew all these people that were kind of living underground there. And that was a really unique situation to live through for me. And I think that was, I've written, Fight the Good Fight, and I've been anti-war, and, politically, it really helped shape me to see what was going on. And also, when people got their number picked for the draft, it was very random. So the guys had to live with this kind of randomness, changing their lives.
Yeah.
And then there are the ones that, like my husband, that had number, 380 or whatever it was, or, 320. And then there were guys that, I was going out with the guy in Guilford that was number 8. And he went in the Marines. He was an outstanding Marine. And then one night he's standing outside my house and he went AWOL. He just, they just snap, at the going to Vietnam,
Yeah,
it was one thing to go through training and be kind of like, he was physically fit, but it's another thing to when they get to the part about killing and they get to the part about you being alone in the jungle and all that kind of stuff. And he went AWOL, and he never made it really into manhood then. I mean, it was really sad, and he never actualized in the way he could have for a guy being between 18 and 21 years old. And there were a lot of guys at that point, and I became very aware of it in Guilford, Connecticut, what was going on with that. Where we were protesting it in Maryland, I was really seeing the fallout from it in Guilford, Connecticut.
Does that affect what you wanted to do in your life at all? Or was it still okay, now I'm really seeing how this is affecting people. Now does it light the embers of wanting to be a journalist even more?
Yeah. And also, in my band, Heavy Manners, my ska band, were very much wrote political things. But of course,
Mm.
we we started 1980 when Reagan. So we had songs that were anti-Reagan for sure. But yeah, I think that well, you know, I don't know if it politicized me as much as I really started being more like kind of a populist and seeing how government really affects people's lives in big and small ways, but and in such a broad way for some people, and that I felt that, and I still do. The politicians are not that in tune with what their policies are really doing to people on the street, and certainly during the Vietnam War, it was very sad actually. Some of them, and they the men that I knew in Connecticut, they smoked a lot of marijuana, but they weren't junkies. They weren't doing heavy drugs or anything like that. They were just mainly peaceniks, but they literally didn't leave the basement because they couldn't go. They couldn't go out on the street, and you couldn't really talk about them because they were hiding. And I imagine now that that was true in a lot of places in the country. That there were men that just didn't, they went AWOL or they came home. They just couldn't cope with the Vietnam War.
Could you feel that? Because that seems like a strange kind of thing. Could you feel that in the air? Could you feel that both the secrecy of it and I don't know how else to describe it, but that just seems like, knowing that there's all these basements in Guilford where there are people who are avoiding the war, like having that knowledge in my head, it would make me feel surreal in some way. And I'm wondering if maybe you felt that or something else.
It was surreal, and the people that housed them were interesting as well. That who would have them in their basement, and the people that lived down the hill from me were, this is the other part of what would make an interesting play. They were drug dealers. They were pretending they were husband and wife, but they were brother and sister. I don't know what reasons, tax reasons or getting a home, or I don't know what financial reason, that they were pretending they were married. But they were brother and sister, and they were dealing in like amyl nitrate, and pills, Quaaludes, speed, that kind of thing. So they were kind of housing these. So they were involved in illegal drugs. And then the guys in the basement were hiding from the war. And it was just a really upstairs, downstairs situation. Would make an interesting play or movie, I think. This dichotomy, and then with these like girls that were seniors in high school finding their way in there. And it's just, it's crazy. I just think it would make an interesting play.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
We're right at the end of the show, and there's one last thing I'm still curious about. What was the turn where you wanted to start expressing yourself musically?
Well, in Wisconsin, I was taking guitar lessons, and I went to camp every summer. So I played a lot of guitar around the campfire, and I was really brought up doing that. And that was also another solace for me, to play guitar in my bedroom in a way that emotionally I was dealing with life from, I think when I was maybe from fourth grade on, I played guitar in my room a lot. And then when I was 12, my parents got me an electric guitar. And then I was playing House of the Rising Sun and like little rock songs and all that kind of thing. So I was always interested in music. I was always interested in rock and roll and guitar. But I think I lived in London for a while, and I think that really gave me a big boost to be in the music business. Because by that time I was old enough that when I was hanging out with musicians and people in the business, I began to really see what it was like and see that I could do well in it, and that I suddenly really wanted to be a part of that, of being in a band myself. And I felt the confidence to do it. And I think living in London was during the time of, Elton John had just put out Yellow Brick Road. And, that kind of explosion of music there. And then I moved to New York City, and I worked at Financial World Magazine, New York Magazine.
Right.
And then eventually I made it to Chicago. And the scene was ripe for like just jumping in then. And I had the nerve to walk up to a band and ask them if I could be their singer. And I started writing songs. I just really, it all kind of came together in Chicago. But I started getting I became more and more in the nightlife as I got older and older. That I was out in the clubs late. I was out listening to music late. I was working as a bartender from the other 9 to 5 in Chicago, and that kind of thing. So I got I felt like I'd really found where I belong.
Yeah.
When I started becoming kind of a club kid.
Yeah. What years are you in London and then in New York?
I'm in London, like 74 to 76. Then I'm New York, like 76 to 78. And then I'm in Chicago. Yeah.
Okay. So prime.
I'm in Chicago by 79. I'm in Chicago doing stuff.
Yeah. So I was just trying to place, because I'm like, oh, your music is in the same realm. I'm like, oh, the Specials, and like it's in the same kind of areas. I'm just like, yeah. Okay. So I was just trying to.
It wasn't. And so I had been listening to reggae and been living in London, and kind of that edgy music.
Uh-huh.
And then when I was in New York, it was Patti Smith, Talking Heads, Television, the Ramones, but that hadn't really hit into Chicago, except every Sunday night at La Mer Viper, people get together and listen to punk music. So it was just starting off there. And I felt like, I guess I was bringing what I knew about London, what I knew about New York. So I felt not that I was an expert in punk music, but that I was I had more of a vision for it from seeing it explode in other scenes.
Yeah, for sure. Kate, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for talking to me and talking about things that I honestly haven't ever thought about, maybe, or I haven't thought about, of course, since I was, 12, 15. And it was enjoyable. Thank you so much. It's a great show.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love your album so much, and I was really glad you could join me.
Okay, see you soon, I hope.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.